Lante. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning, Kristen.
Dave, 5 book publishers, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, Penguin, Macmillan, and Hachette, all chose to settle days or even months after the government had filed charges against them. So why doesn't Apple just settle too, Dave?
Well, Apple's CEO Tim Cook says it's out of principle because they'd have to sign something that says they did something wrong, and he says they didn't do anything wrong, so he's not going to admit to that. I suspect there's a little bit more to it than that. I think if Apple settles, it opens itself up to a number of lawsuits from the attorneys general around the country, and so I suspect that's a big part of it. Apple, as many of you probably know, settled in Europe, but legal experts say that it didn't expose itself to subsequent lawsuits. So I think they've looked at the ROI of settling and said, well, at this point, it's not worth it.
Judge Denise Cote, who's presiding over the case, said at a pretrial hearing last month that she believes the government will be able to show evidence that Apple knowingly participated in a conspiracy. So does that imply that Apple's chances are grim here?
Yeah, that was quite a pronouncement that she made last month. And I guess if I were Apple's lawyers, I wouldn't be too encouraged by that statement. But, you know, when you look at what she said, she couched it. She had some caveats in it. Said, now, having said that, I haven't looked at the detailed evidence that Apple's going to present. I haven't heard from Apple's witnesses. So she did have that caveat. My sense, Kristen, is she's just really trying to get Apple to settle like the book publishers did, because, of course, courts are busy. The backlog is there, and they're trying to get through it, and settling is the most expeditious way for the courts to use taxpayers' money. So I think she's trying to get Apple in a headlock and try to get them to settle, but I don't think they will at this point anyway.
Now, central to the government's case is the charge that Apple was the ringmaster in an effort to raise prices on ebooks. What's your take on the charges, Dave?
Right. So just a little bit of history here. Of course, we all know, Amazon got it all started with the Kindle with ebooks at $9.99. And the way that Amazon's model worked is they were a wholesaler. They would get a price from the booksellers, which, generally the industry practice is to get the price at about half of the, suggested retail price. And then the retailer can sell it for whatever they want. So a lot of times Amazon would sell books at a loss because it can make it up in other ways, and we all know that Amazon has an amazing model there. I think what's happening here is that Apple was trying to nose its way essentially into that market with $12.99 and $14.99 prices, and it knew that book publishers were concerned that Amazon was bombing prices and it was going to hollow out its value proposition to readers. And so I think Apple was holding out a carrot saying, hey, here's a way in which you can deal with that Amazon effect, work with us, and we'll help you essentially prop up prices, was the implication. And so the government saying, oh, that's a foul, that's collusion. Now, I think what's interesting here in this case is essentially there was a favored nation status clause in the Apple contract, which meant that if Apple was selling books at a price lower than $12.99 or $14.99 to Apple's competitors, then in that instance, Apple would be able to charge less. And so the government is arguing that clause essentially hurt consumers because it was forcing the booksellers to force Amazon to prop up its prices. And of course, subsequent to the iPad's launch and iBooks, you saw prices for premium books go up. Now, the other piece of this is that Apple was really, in classic Apple fashion, was trying to change the model from one of wholesaler to one of agent. And in the case of an agent, the publisher sets the price, not the retailer. And so, the question really is, do prices overall go up as a result of this? And the data is kind of mixed on that, frankly. I mean, you could point to situations where prices actually went down in the long tail.
So based on the fact that the data is kind of mixed there, do you think it's going to be a back and forth case?
Well, I think there will be a ruling on this. It really depends on how well the government can show that Apple actually colluded. I guess my personal opinion is, from what I've read, I don't see necessarily the hard collusion. I think the booksellers basically said, hey, they got us dead to rights here. We're all in New York. We're all having dinner. We're talking about raising prices. Apple, I think, was playing the silent hand in all this. The ringmaster is kind of an interesting term. Personally, again, I'm not sure Apple was the ringmaster, although I feel as though Apple totally understood what was going on here. So I think there will be a decision, but I think it's not cut and dried, despite what the judge said in the pretrial hearing. It's not cut and dry that Apple's going to lose this case.
Okay. Now, if convicted, what kind of consequences is Apple facing?
Well, near term, there's no damages. Apple doesn't have to pay anything if they're found guilty. But as I said earlier, long term, I think it could open them up to lawsuits, private lawsuits, civil lawsuits, more civil lawsuits than this one. Attorneys general around the country. Apple's got a cash hoard that's bigger than most companies' market cap. So a lot of people will be licking their chops if Apple loses this.
Former policy director for the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, David Balto, has said that this case will effectively set the rules for internet commerce. Can you explain what his statement means?
Yeah, I don't really know what he meant in detail by that. I'm not sure exactly. That was sort of taken, I'm not sure, out of context or in context when that was printed. But my first reaction was it's utter nonsense. I think the market is ultimately going to determine what happens long term in internet commerce. Having said that, there certainly will be legal ramifications for the near and midterm. I mean, I do think this has implications in terms of how, well, certainly how books are priced, but also other content, whether it's music or movies and the like. And the interesting thing to me is it seems as though the proposal that Apple has made is more similar to what the movie industry is doing, holding back certain premium content unless it's priced higher. But again, Kristen, in my feeling, I think it's citizens publishers are ultimately going to determine what happens in the book selling business. And I think that's the beauty of the internet is it's created this long tail of content and it's allowed authors to become publishers. So my first reaction to that statement was come on, the market is going to decide, not some legal system, not some judge, not some bureaucrats in the Federal Trade Commission. So I hope I'm right.
Now, Dave, just like many traditional print publishing businesses, the book publishing business has been in turmoil over the past decade. We know that. How do you see mobile devices and services like the Kindle, the Nook, and iBooks sort of changing the game?
Yeah, well, it's obviously very disruptive, not only in books, but we've seen it in music, we're seeing it in movies and other content. People call it the dead trees, right? The print business is in complete turmoil and disruption. I think if you look at the data in 2009, you're talking about maybe 1-2%, low single digits of books were consumed electronically, and now today it's around 20%. And you can easily see that going, well upwards of 50% by the end of the decade. So that in and of itself completely changes the model. And I think that's the beauty of technology in our industry is technology is disrupting all kinds of businesses, retail, music, books, financial services. And so I think that this trend is going to continue. I think to me, the most interesting thing is the long tail of publishing where an author actually can become a publisher, and he or she can say, I've got an idea for a book. The publishers won't take it. I can't get this thing, printed. I can't get anybody to pick it up. So I'm just going to publish it myself. I'm going to go to Amazon and I'm going to publish it directly, for example. And Amazon